everyone, I'm Loida. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I will be covering a very popular question. Especially if you're brand new, you definitely want to know what it is that you do as soon as you get an offer accepted. So stay tuned. So let's say you were representing a seller, you negotiated an offer, and now you have an executed purchase agreement. So what is next? Now, before I continue, I do want to mention that everything that I will be talking about is based on the process and what we do out here in the state of California. So let's say you have that executed purchase agreement. The first thing that you're going to want to do, and even before you have this executed agreement, is that you are going to want to have your vendors in place. You want to know exactly who is going to be on your team. So some of the individuals that are going to be on your team, first of all, is going to be an escrow company. You want to make sure that you have an escrow company and an escrow officer that you can count on for any transactions moving forward where you're going to be representing the seller. Along with the escrow company, you want to have a title company, a termite company, a few home inspectors, a roofing company, and you guys are getting the idea. So once you have all of these people in place, the first thing that you're going to want to do as soon as you have that executed purchase agreement is that you will be sending out an email that is going to include all of the main parties involved in the transaction. So usually that is just called an opening email. So typically what I do is that I have the purchase agreement, I have any counters that were sent, and I put it all together in one PDF, and I will email it to the escrow officer that I work with, and I will include the title rep that I have selected to work on the file, along with my transaction coordinator, that is also known as a TC, and I will also be including the buyer's agent and their transaction coordinator if they work with one. Now, on a side note, I do want you to know that whether you are brand new or you are a seasoned agent, it is in your best interest to always use a transaction coordinator to handle your files. Now, the reason that you want to have a transaction coordinator is because they are the individuals in charge of all of the paperwork. There is so much paperwork involved in a transaction, and a TC is in charge of overlooking every single page. Anything that needs to be signed, they make sure it gets signed. Any signatures that are missing, they make sure to stay on top of you as the agent or the other agent or whoever it is to make sure that everything is filled out correctly. Something else that they do is that they make sure that all of the deadlines are met by all of the parties, which takes me on to my next point, deadlines. So once you have sent out that email, depending on how your transaction coordinator works, they are pretty much the ones that are going to be working the entire file from start to finish. At this point, what I would do as an agent is that I would let my seller know that they will be receiving an email from my transaction coordinator and also the escrow company in which they will be introducing themselves. And also I want to make it clear to the seller that these two vendors are going to be very involved in terms of paperwork and reaching out to them for anything that needs to be done during the transaction. Something else that I make sure to cover with my sellers as soon as we open escrow or even before we open escrow is that I want them to make sure that they know that during the first 7 days, as soon as we open escrow, they will have to be filling out seller disclosures, and those will be coming from my transaction coordinator. So the seller's disclosures pretty much is documentation where the seller has to disclose anything and everything that they know about the property. Usually out here in California, it is standard for the seller to only have 7 days to fill out these disclosures. So let's say you open escrow on a Monday. By the following Monday, that is when the seller's disclosures are due. Along with the seller disclosures, I also let them know that eventually the buyer will be coming in and doing a home inspection. Usually it will just be a home inspection company, but sometimes the buyer does like to be present when the inspector is out. And it is also very possible that the buyer might want to do other type of inspections. For example, roofing or foundation or whatever it is. And I make it clear to my seller that this is just standard protocol and the buyer is just doing their due diligence. In California, it's typical for the buyer to have 17 days unless you agree to a different time frame. So if you recall that I mentioned earlier, my transaction coordinator is the one that sends out a timeline to all of the parties involved. In my case, my transaction coordinator, her name is Katie. Katie will send an email to our escrow company She will send an email to the seller, and she will send an email to the buyer's agent and myself with the timeline of all of the deadlines that need to be met. Usually the deadlines mostly rely on the buyer side. Some of the deadlines that the buyer has to meet are: one, the earnest money deposit that needs to be sent within the first 3 days. The second deadline is the home inspection deadline that they have to meet. The third deadline is the appraisal contingency. The fourth is the loan contingency. And I believe those are pretty much it. Now, from the seller side, the only thing that the seller needs to do are the disclosures. That's the only deadline that they have to meet. So let's say we are now at day 17 and the buyer has already done their home inspection. At this point, you as a listing agent might be receiving a request for repairs from the buyer's agent. They might send you a long list of items, and usually when they send you the request for repairs, they will also be sending the home inspection report attached. So let's say they send you the home inspection report and they also send you a request for repairs. At that point, now it's your job to go back to the seller, present the request for repairs, and now you kind of have to negotiate with the buyer's agent based on what the seller wants to do. It is your job as a professional and their real estate agent to help them make the best decision. That way it's a win-win for everybody. Now, something to keep in mind is that just because a buyer sends a request for repairs, it does not mean that the seller has to accept to do all of those repairs. The three options are that the seller can say yes to all of the requests, the seller can say no, and the other one is that the seller can negotiate, meaning that they can decide to do certain repairs and not others, or they can give a credit, or they can reduce the price of the home. Ultimately, that is the seller's decision, along with you advising them as to what would be the best thing. Now, one other vendor that I do want to mention before I forget is the Termite Company. Usually a buyer will request for the seller to take care of the termite report and also do the Section 1 termite. So there are two types of termites. There's Section 1 and Section 2. The bad one is Section 1, and that's all you need to know. Because typically when you get a purchase agreement, you will notice that the buyer will request for the seller to get termite clearance. So termite clearance is done once the Section 1 is taken care of. It's very common for mostly all of the homes to have termite damage. Some is very minor, or just pieces of wood need to be changed out, but in other occasions, the entire house needs to be tinted and fumigated. So again, this is something that you have to watch out for when you're reading the purchase agreement that was sent to you. Now, when it comes to the termite inspection, that is something that you as a listing agent is in charge of getting. There are a lot of termite companies out there that give a free termite inspection. So once you get that termite report, you will see exactly where the damage is and what the costs are. Depending on how much damage there is, the termite company will go out another day to replace the termite, or you as the agent can negotiate with the termite company on when they can go out to the property and do the fumigation. But as a rule of thumb, you definitely want to take care of the termite, especially if it's in the contract, because there are many times that the buyer's lender might require the termite clearance in order to fund the loan. So definitely keep an eye on that. So moving on. So let's say everything that I just mentioned just got taken care of. At this point, you're just pretty much kind of waiting on the buyer. So from your standpoint, working with the seller, there isn't really anything else that needs to be done. We're just waiting for the lender to say everything's cleared and ready to go, and they're ready to issue docs and closing disclosures. And once all that is done, pretty much the transaction is all wrapped up. And usually it's typical for the transaction to be maybe 30 to 35 days, depending on what you agree on. It might happen that you might delay, or you might be able to close sooner. Usually transactions delay because of the buyer side. If something's going on with the loan, or maybe the lender is having a hard time getting like a verification of employment or some type of letter or some type of documentation. But usually it's on the buyer's end when a transaction takes longer. It's never really on the seller's side. And that's it. That pretty much summarizes exactly how a transaction goes. I know that it was a lot of information, but hopefully you were able to understand the entire process from start to finish. Just know that your job really, when it comes to negotiating, will be once you get a request for repairs, because at that point, usually the buyer wants everything done and the seller doesn't want to spend a dime. So you need to keep your emotions out of the transaction and just know that everything will be resolved and you guys will be able to come to a mutual agreement that will be beneficial for everyone, and everyone will be happy, the deal will close, and you will get paid. So thanks for watching this video. I hope that you guys found it helpful. If you did, let me know in the comment section below, and also let me know what other type of videos you want me to continue doing. See you guys on the next one.